nostra comunità per la vostra presenza qui dall'Accademia Britannica. È una gioia accogliervi qui stasera con un benvenuto caloroso. It's a very great pleasure for me to introduce tonight's Wednesday evening lecture on a Tuesday, the second in a series of 3 lectures in which our 9-month award holders share with us a portion of the research that they have been conducting here at the British School at Rome over the last year. And so it's a pleasure, a privilege and a joy for me to be able to welcome tonight's speaker, Dr. Serena Alessi, one of the most dynamic scholars that we've had the good fortune to include in our fellowship. Serena has an unblemished academic record, full marks cum laude in her BA from the University of Catania, full marks cum laude in her master's from the University of Siena, and no corrections in her PhD in Italian Studies from Royal Holloway, University of London. A star ascendant, Serena is building up a head of steam in the realm of publications, including work produced with Aigne, Italian Special Edition, and MHRA working papers in the humanities. Serena has lifted us all over the last 9 months both in a general sense of scholarly companionship and also in a sharp academic sense. We're extremely grateful for your enterprising spirit, one reflection of which was the highly successful book launch on Goliarda Sapienza and a film screening which you organised in these corridors. If Serena looks familiar to you, it may be that you recognise her off the telly. She's a regular on primetime television, on Rai Uno's 1001 Libro Scrittori in TV, on which she critiques recent publications. Serena's work on gender and post-colonial perspectives in Italian literature is at the cutting edge of modern languages. Just when I thought I had a handle on the complexities of Rome's identity as a city, Serena introduced me to further, much understudied complexities, looking at how the heritage of colonialism has created new identities here in Rome. And she sheds light on further deep-seated contradictions, such as how Rome, once the centre of a complicated imperial politics, now faces the emergence of African immigration. To help us make sense of it all, wrenched away from the Rai Uno cameras and to deliver a paper, one of 4 papers over the next 2 weeks, please join me in extending a very warm welcome to Dr. Serena Alessi.
Thank you, Tom, for this very generous presentation, and thank you, Tom and Christopher and all the community here at the BSR for these wonderful, unforgettable 9 months in which I've been very honored and happy to be one of the Rome Fellows. And I would like to thank all my friends, fellows, and all the community one by one, but this is not a farewell, this is my presentation. So I'll just say regarding this presentation to, well, at least to some people who really helped me towards the creation of this lecture today. Antonio Palmieri, who helped me with my photos of Rome and taught me to take some pictures around. You will see some of them in the PowerPoint. And Nicole and Cinta to have supervised my English translation of Italian texts that you will see now in some quotations. Okay, so what I'm going to do today in my talk is to try to examine the cultural significance of the city of Rome in Italian post-colonial literature produced by women authors over the last 20 years. My paper will be divided into 3 parts. In the first, I will briefly give you a framework of Italian colonialism and on Italian post-colonial literature. In the second, I will analyze more in detail some works by 2 writers, Ribka Sibhatu and Igiaba Scego. And in the third, we will leave the BSR and we'll do a special journey around Rome all together. So please bear with me for the first two parts, because clearly the third one is the most interesting and amusing. Okay, first of all, a little bit of historical framework. Italy never had a colonial empire big and powerful as the British or the French one. Nevertheless, different territories of Africa were military occupied or bought by Italy between the end of the 19th century and the fascist regime. Already in 1869, so only 8 years after its unification, Italy sent a military expedition in Eritrea. In 1889, the invasion of Somalia began, that Italy then bought for 150,000 sterling. Generally speaking, in the last 2 decades of the 19th century, the Italian army regularly invaded the Horn of Africa and also adopted repressive measures against the local population. The first part of Italian colonialism in Africa ended in 1896 when the Italian army was defeated in Adwa in Ethiopia. But it soon started again. In 1911, Italy invaded Libya, and in 1934 it invaded Ethiopia, while between the 22 and the 27 the occupation of Somalia was completed. As you may know, or as you may expect, fascism strongly pursued colonialism in Africa, and during fascism this was the Africa Orientale Italiana, Italia and East Africa. It's only with the end of the Second World War that also Italian imperialism in Africa came to an end. Even though Somalia kept being a protectorate of Italy until 1960. So during colonialism in Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia and Libya, Italian was taught at school. Italian was the official language. New infrastructures were built by Italian engineers, and Italians interacted with the local populations. Soldiers, for example, in many cases married women from the colonies, and in even more cases they had children with them. And all of this, at least until it was forbidden by the Italian racial laws in 1937. So Italian colonialism in Africa has left enduring traces. But despite these traces, the era of colonialism and its effects on the whole Italy have never been properly assimilated by the national political and historiographical debate. This is also due to the fact that post-war governments had to legitimate the presence of Italy as part of the Western alliance after the Second World War in the New World Order. And for this reason, Italian war crimes were never really condemned, also because Italy was in that strange position of being both responsible for war crimes in Africa, but also a victim of war crimes by Nazis. So commonly, Italians never consider themselves as the bad ones when it comes to colonization. When Italian students learn this part of their past at school, they won't find in their history books that to conquer lands and to subjugate people, Italian army used chemical weapons. And by the way, if they study this part of history at school, which is very rarely the case, because normally it's just one page in a chapter of on the Second World War. So, at the end, the idea that Italians are good people, Italiani brava gente, is a very famous expression used by Angelo Del Boca, one of the leading experts in Italian colonial studies. This idea is predominant in the common culture, and Italians are forgetful, or they just have always been unaware of their colonial past. So what we have is, on one side, a problem of forgotten historical memory, and on the other, these evidences, these traces left by Italian colonialism in Africa. But what, in my opinion, is even more intriguing is that these traces were present, and they are still present, not only in the invaded countries, but also in Italy, a proof that the relationship between the country and the African colonies was mutual, although unequal. There are many studies and photos and documentaries telling us how much of Rome there is in Mogadishu and Asmara. But I try to turn the question and I ask myself, how much of Mogadishu and Asmara is there in Rome? So the aim of my talk today is to try to give possible answers to this question by using literature to investigate the traces of colonialism in Italy. The only Italian novel dealing with Italian colonialism published before the last 20 years is Tempo di uccidere, Time to Kill, published in 1947 by the Italian journalist Ennio Flaiano. And the book is also one of the few fictional works on colonialism written by an Italian writer with no African origins. In fact, in recent years, some writers have recovered the memory of the colonial experience, and these are just some of them. They are all either born in Italian former colonies in Africa and then they moved to Italy, or they were born in Italy and grew up in a culturally and linguistically mixed family. They all write in Italian. They all write about the two different cultures to which they belong, that of the African origins of each and that of Italy, where they live and work. Some of them are more popular than others, some of them sell more books than others. Let's say that in the vast panorama of Italian publishing industry, they generally have a limited distribution network. Many of them have other jobs apart from their writing. Very often they are cultural mediators or journalists or academics. The books by these authors have changed throughout time. The first editions had a clear educational scope. Many times they were published by smaller independent publishers, and they were of course written for Italian readers. So for example, they had a very heavy paratextual explanations or a glossary at the end of the book to translate or paraphrase all the words coming from African languages inserted in the texts. Or for example, some editions were specifically made for school students with exercise and reading comprehension activities at the end of the book. Little by little, the editions have become simpler. Foreign words are not always translated, there is no glossary at the end, and the educational intent is not so clearly evident, at least from the book itself, the book as an object. And major publishing houses have started to publish their texts, or at least bigger than the former ones. And also the label to indicate these writers have changed. At first they were called migrant writers, which of course was also a very engaging definition, of course, as you may imagine, to sell more books. But then editors realized that often these writers didn't really experience any kind of migration, and the term post-colonial started to be used. Of course, post-colonial literature is a label. The term is controversial, and we agree that I will use it here to indicate the works of authors who deal with the heritage of colonialism and imperialism. It's in the past 15 years, more or less, that Italian academics have started to investigate Italian post-colonial literature, so it is a rather young branch of studies within Italian studies, especially if you compare it with post-colonial literature in French or English studies. Recently, in academic debates in Italian study, there has been what has been called the real post-colonial turn, meaning this that different important monographs or collections of essays have been recently published on the topic. I don't have numbers with me at the moment, but I would dare to say that 90% of these publications come from the Anglo-American university context, where of course cultural studies are much more established than in Italy. Among all the so-called Italian post-colonial writers, I decided to focus on two women writers. Writing the memory of the colonial archive in literary form has been predominantly a female project. Cristina Lombardi Diop and Caterina Romeo write in the introduction of post-colonial Italy, one of the main volumes on the theme. And critics have already identified and analyzed the links between women's writing and post-colonial literature. Indeed, the choice of female writers to investigate the present identity of Italy and of Rome, as I will later explain, is not accidental. The idea of tracing expansion and imperialism has traditionally been associated with that of a virgin land to be conquered, often metaphorically compared to a virgin woman to be possessed. So the female viewpoint represents a spatial angle from which to observe colonialism and its effects, since women experience the mechanisms of power and discrimination not only through racial but also through sexual inequality, according to the old combination of sexism and racism that in Italy has not been fully overcome. In particular, the two contemporary women authors I'm going to talk about are Ribka Sibhatu and Igiaba Scego, and I choose them among others because of the special treatment of the city of Rome in their works. Okay, so first of all, let's see what they have in common, apart from their African origins, apart from their being women writers and the fact that they live in Rome. I would say as a first thing that they are both very engaged, and not only through their literary works, with some of the political and cultural issues that Italy and the whole Europe are recently facing, such as the emergence of immigration, the inclusion of new citizens, the unveiling of a historical memory that has been forgotten or marginalized. Apart from being a writer, Ribka Sibhatu is also a cultural mediator and an activist. She works with migrant communities in Rome and elsewhere. And Igiaba Scego doesn't only write fiction, but she's also very active in the press and in social media. She's a contributor to different journals and newspapers, such as Internazionale, Il Manifesto, l'Unità. They both have a PhD. Sibhatu in sociology from the Università La Sapienza, and Scego in pedagogy from the Università di Roma III. In their works, history is very much present. They openly refer to colonialism and the Italian Empire, and about the consequences of colonialism. And also questions of identity, intersectionality, translation, and mediation are at the center of their literary production. Now, at this point, I have to say that considering that they both live in Rome, as you may expect, I've always considered to interview them as part of my project. But unfortunately, this has not been possible, at least for the moment. Ribka Sibhatu is currently experiencing serious troubles with the Eritrean government, which is actually a dictatorship. Because as I said, Ribka is also an activist. I would say she's mainly an activist. And so she has constantly helped refugees in these years. And I've been told that she's sort of paying for this now, because I don't know if you're aware, but Eritrean dictatorship has spies everywhere in Europe. Well, at least in Italy, but I would say everywhere, yeah. So I've just been told that it is useless for the moment to keep trying to contact her, because of course she clearly has other problems to think about. Well, unfortunately, I tried to contact Scego through different means in this month, but she's never replied to me. And I've been told that she's always very busy. But in a certain sense, we can say this is good news. It means that she's very popular. She definitely cannot be called minor writer anymore. And it is not a big problem for the moment. I still hope to meet them in future. So let's focus on each of the two of them. Ribka Sibhatu was born in Asmara in 1962. In the course of her youth, she was in jail and she was then exiled. But she managed to reach Ethiopia first and then France, where she got married. After her divorce, she moved to Italy, where she started her university career. And she has published collections of poems, a monograph on immigration and citizenship taken from a PhD thesis, and she co-wrote a documentary which is based on her story. I will here remember just two of her works: the book Aulò, Canto Poesia dall'Eritrea, and a song poem from Eritrea, and the documentary Aulò, Roma Postcolonial Rome. Aulò, Canto Poesia dall'Eritrea is the first book by Sibhatu, published for the first time in 1993 and then republished various times. It is a sort of autobiographical tale, but it is also a collection of poems, Eritrean fairy tales, proverbs, riddles, and so on and so forth. It is written in Italian and in Tigrinya with parallel texts and with the insertion of drawings as well. At the end of the book, there are also practical information about Eritrea, its culture, its history, its cooking recipes, and there is also a list of various useful references for Eritreans in Italy and in Rome, like places where to meet. It is exactly for this reason that I wanted to show you this book today, because it is a perfect example of what has been a peculiarity of the first editions of Italian postcolonial books, namely the variety not only of the linguistic codes, here we have Italian, Tigrinya, and drawings, but also of the theme. It is not only a book for children, but it has a clear didactic intent. One of the aims of the book is to inform the readers about traditions and stories that they do not know. But there is more. In this book, Sibhatu tells her story and tells her readers that Rome has welcomed her, especially the University of Rome. She tells us that she loves Roman parks and that at least when she doesn't have to go to the police station, she really feels Italian. The Rome of the Republic, of Nero, of St. Peter and I established a marriage in the chaos. Ruins whisper a mysterious and moving language to me. Parks are my favorite places. When thoughts burden me, they comfort me. Rome has many eternal tales for the exiles. When not in the police station, it feels like home. So Sibhatu recalls the city of Rome and the peculiar sense of romanità many times in her works. Her reflection on the capital city culminates in the documentary Aulò, Roma Postcolonial, written by Sibhatu herself and by Simone Brioni. Some of you may know him. He's an assistant professor at Stony Brook University in New York, and he has widely worked and published on Italian postcolonial literature. The documentary is directed by Simone Brioni together with Ermanno Guida and Graziano Chiscuzzo and distributed in 2012. The film is a journey in the life of a person, Ribka Sibhatu, and in the history of the city of Rome. It is inspired by Ribka's poetry, and the DVD itself comes with a collection of poems. It is a bilingual booklet entitled Aulò, 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 Poesie di nostalgia, desiderio ed amore, Poems of Nostalgia, Exile and Love. At this point you may ask, what is this word Aulò, which is present in all the works by Sibhatu that I mentioned? Very briefly, Aulò are traditional Eritrean oral poems with a strong political function. They may be adapted to different contexts. For example, in the documentary, Ribka recalls an Aulò that her uncle composed against Mussolini when Italian racial laws were promulgated. And I would like you to show this passage.
Mio zio, che è venuto a conoscenza di queste leggi attraverso la traduzione di mia nonna e mia mamma, si è talmente indignato di essere considerato inferiore ai bianchi, ha composto un aulò di denuncia e di preghiera nello stesso tempo. Aulò, aulò, aulò. Aulò khbil, aulò khongod kudo. Aulò khbil, aulò khongod kudo. Mussolini khabde zarab kado. Aulò khbil, aulò khongod kudo. Mariam misaykuni. التكبر الليدو خيت السقني جنبين عين خالق تخوني تتعلم نجر تبتني كومشتاتو دل خبالاسو كومشتاتو دل خبالاسو يري إن حبش خورسو يري إن حبش خورسو.
So Aulò may also represent a poetic resistance to Italian colonialism and violence. And Sibhatu tells us about this Aulò while she sat in front of the Vittoriano, as you just saw, a building which is one of the symbols of patriotic celebrations and which also hosted the Museum of Italian Emigration when the documentary was shot, but then it closed in 2015. Together with Ribka Sibhatu, Rome is the other protagonist of the film, whose aim is to challenge the urban space, trying to give possible answers to questions such as, what is Rome? Whose is Rome? The starting point is very personal. It's Ribka's life and writing. The bond between Rome and Asmara comes immediately at the beginning of the film. She says that Asmara is called Little Rome, and that she would like Rome to be filled with Eritrean colors. The two cities are interlaced, as it is Ribka's personal story with the history of her two countries. She shows her family tree, but Ribka's story is actually a tool to talk about Rome's and Italy's past and present history, as when she sits, for example, in the Via Appia and talks about Roman history and Italian colonialism and her own family. All the texts, both prose and poetry, that are mentioned in the documentary are taken from Sibhatu's works. As I said, the documentary comes with a collection of poems, Poesie di nostalgia, desiderio ed amore, where there are some of the poems that Sibhatu declaims in the documentary, but also other previously unpublished texts. Some of them explicitly refer to her mixed identity, Eritrean, French, and Italian, and Sibhatu often uses Roman dialect to talk about her subjectivity, as for example in this poem here, So bella nera, I'm black and I'm beautiful, which I will read in Italian exactly in order to show you that is in Roman dialect. You can follow my translation. No, it's not mine. You can follow the translation into English that there is in the bilingual booklet. If there are any Roman friends among you, I really ask you sorry for my fake Roman accent. Lavoro nero, gatto nero, giornata nera, e a me dicono di colore. Visto che il nero non è bello, per non t'offenne meglio ditte de colore. Ma quale offesa, vi dico io che so bella nera. A dir vero, nera nera non so color cuoio di cioccolato. Ero solo abissina, so franco eritrea de Roma e mi chiamo Ribka. Se non ve basta ditemi nera, perché so bella così. Using Roman dialect, Ribka is telling her readers that she's one of them, she's like them, she's like us. And she shows the hypocrisy of racism. As for example, the word colored, di colore, that Italians often use in order not to say black. And she's doing this with the language of those who are racist against her. So Ribka talks and writes in Roman dialect to assert her subjectivity. I'm Eritrean, French and Italian, I live in Rome, I'm black, and my name is Ribka. Let's move to the second of the authors I focused on during my research here in Rome, Igiaba Scego, who was born in Rome in 1974 from Somali parents. She never really experienced migration. She is the daughter of a Somali politician who was also a minister, who took a stand against the dictatorship of Siad Barre in Somalia, and for this reason, her father moved to Rome, where Scego was born. Among all the Italian postcolonial writers, you remember one of my previous slides with all the writers, she's one of the most prolific and certainly one of the best known. I would say she's the best known. I think she's the only one among those postcolonial writers of the previous slide who actually live off her writing alone. Scego has mainly written novels and short stories and has set the majority of her works in Rome. Her characters often live in the semi-peripheries such as Primavalle or Tor Pignattara. Her whole oeuvre is imbued with the representation of the city of Rome. In her novels, Scego addresses issues of gender, sexuality, and embodiment. Her protagonists are women who very often personally experience the strong bond between sexism and racism. Scego's representation of the colonial violence often passed through the representation of violence on women's bodies. That's the case, for example, of Rhoda, the protagonist of the novel of the same title, who is a Somali girl who deliberately becomes a prostitute in Italy as a way to overcome her rooting out trauma and her unexpressed bisexuality. Other examples of the bond between colonialism and women's bodies can be found in Oltre Babilonia, Beyond Babylon, a story with interlaced narrative voices, interlaced characters, interlaced places and times. One of the characters of Oltre Babilonia, Mar, is obliged to get pregnant and then to have an abortion by her girlfriend. And by the way, the representation of homosexuality is another recurring theme in Scego that unfortunately, of course, I do not have the time to analyze here. Another character of this book, Zura, is harassed by the janitor of her Italian school in Somalia, or another woman, Fame, is raped together with her fiancé by Italian soldiers. A third example of female characters in Scego's novels may be Adwa, the protagonist of Scego's latest novel. Adwa is a Somali woman who in the 70s arrived in Italy following the promise that she would have become an actress. The promise soon proved to be misleading because Adwa did shoot a movie, but it was a pornographic one. And in order to do it, she accepted the producer's sexual blackmail. I want to spend just another couple of words on Adwa, because this novel will come back later on in my talk. Adwa is an interesting character in Scego's oeuvre, not only because she's named after the Italian defeat against the Ethiopians in 1896, but also because her story is connected with the present migrant crisis in the Mediterranean. In present-day Rome, Adwa meets and then marries a young man, a refugee who survived the journey across the Mediterranean Sea, arrived in Lampedusa and then in Rome. Adwa calls him Titanic, which is not a nice nickname for somebody who didn't drown. But he calls her Vecchia Lira, Old Lira, because Adwa arrived in Italy in the 70s when the currency was the lira and certainly not the euro. So it is an unfriendly way to say that she's older than him, that she belongs to a previous generation of migrants. So the novel Adua also shows the differences and the tensions that there are inside the current phenomenon of migration, which is of course a very complicated issue. So bodies are central in Scego's novels, and these bodies move inside a transnational space. Borders between countries and also between languages are often very blurred in Scego. Her novels are set in more than one place, one always being Rome, and characters usually speak more than one language. These stylistic and linguistic choices also have a political function. By making her characters speaking different languages and using these languages as a vehicle to understand cultural differences, and by making her characters moving in more than one place and belonging to more than one country, Scego performs an act of cultural resistance. As Simone Brioni writes in the Somali Within, Scego, but actually he is referring to Somali Italian literature in general, disrupts the model that presumes a mutual exclusiveness between national languages, showing the illusion that stands beyond the conception of monolingual hegemony, which imagines its boundaries as coinciding with those of a nation. And we all know that language is one of the first indicators of racism. Within this transnational language and this transnational space, Scego draws a map. More than one, actually. We find one, for example, in La mia casa è dove sono, My house is where I am, an autobiographical story published in 2010. Scego narrates so when one day she sketched a map of Mogadishu on a piece of paper, but she felt that something was missing. So she stuck on this map of Mogadishu some post-it notes with the names of Roman neighborhoods and monuments. So Scego draws Rome on Mogadishu, the only way for her to have her map completed, and starts talking about her own Rome, made of her personal memories and of the forgotten memory of Italian colonialism. My map is the mirror of these years of changes. It is not a coherent map. It's center, but it's also periphery. It's Rome, but it's also Mogadishu. It's Igiaba, but it's also you. As Ribka Sibhatu was asserting her subjectivity, saying, "My name is Ribka and I'm from Rome," Igiaba Scego is putting herself as a subject, as a feminine and black subject, at the center of a map that for the first time is drawn by the colonized and subjugated subject, which of course Igiaba Scego is not, because she's never personally experienced colonialism nor migration, but at least that she represents the colonized and the subjugated subject. Igiaba's personal map in My House is Where I Am becomes a political, real and geographical map in Roma negata, percorsi postcoloniali nella città, Rome denied, postcolonial paths in the city. In this book, she uses different sources, journals, articles, books, to survey the presence of colonial references in the urban space. Scego affirms to be obsessed with places, and the aim of the book is exactly that of using these places to sketch an alternative map of Rome, to build a city on the basis of a collective consciousness different than the dominant one. Yesterday the colonized, today the migrants, victim of a self-engendering and self-absolving system. This is why I'm so obsessed with places. It's from there that we have to start a different path, a different Italy. The link between nowadays migration and former colonialism is evident, as you can see, but we would need another talk or possibly a PhD thesis or possibly 1 year to properly discuss it. So I just want to say to you that this link of course exists, and that to a certain extent post-colonial writers show that it is impossible to understand today's problems without even realizing the problems that we caused yesterday. The book is then made by texts on Rome by Scego and images of Rome by the photographer Rino Bianchi. Photos like this one or this one, where black Italian citizens are the subjects and are also depicted together with the places that are the symbols of the subjugation of their ancestors, in a certain sense avenge photos like this one or this one, taken during the colonial period in Africa, in which African people are the object of male European gaze and violence. And These photos here is actually taken from the magazine L'Illustrazione Italiana, and it's interesting because it's clearly there to show to Italian readers how beautiful and exotic African women were. Okay, now let's start our third part. Okay, let's start our journey around Rome. We will leave the BSR, virtually, don't worry. Sibhatu and Scego will be our tour guide, and we will look for places that are linked to Italian colonial history in Rome, and we will discover why. So, let's exit the BSR, so we are here, okay. Let's exit the BSR, and let's walk in northeast direction, following for the first part. For this part, we will follow the route of tram 19 and 3. But actually, before reaching our first destination, which is B, there is already a place of interest for our quest for traces of colonialism in Rome, or better, there was a place. Less than 10 minutes walking from the BSR in Via Aldrovandi 16, so here, there was the African Museum, who was previously called Colonial Museum, created in 1923, where there were a collection of objects from the Italian colonies in Africa. This museum was really here, 10 minutes walking, after the Second World War changed name, and it was then closed in 2011. Now, part of the collection moved to the Museo Pigorini. I just wanted to mention this place, so the former African Museum in Rome, just to show you how traces of colonialism can be close to where we live, to the BSR. But let's keep walking, and when we pass Villa Ada, we will soon be in what is commonly called Quartiere Africano, which is here, more or less, and yeah, you can see it here. So this map is here, this part. Okay, African neighborhood. Why is it African? Because the toponymy of that area entirely concerns Roman and Italian post-colonial past. Streets and roads and squares are named, they are still named, after the territories that Italians brutally conquered during colonialism. And so we have, for example, Via Tripolitana, Via Tripoli, Via Libia, Via Eritrea, Via Mogadiscio, and many others. In the short story Il disegno, the drawing, Scego writes, in Italy, some streets have the names of Africa. In Rome, there is even the African neighborhood. In Viale Libia, some Romans say, there are nice clothes shops. You can make some good deals. And then nothing. They go to Viale Libia to buy a jumper, they live in Via Vigurtina, or they kiss in Viale Somania. But they do not know. It's not their fault. It's not like at school they teach you these things. We were good, they tell you, we built bridges. And we don't know because no one teaches it. And indeed, if you write Quartiere Africano on Google, you will soon find websites such as Google Answers or Yahoo Answers, where people who are thinking to move to Rome ask if this neighborhood is a safe area, or if perhaps there are too many migrants coming from Africa there around. We all know that between Parioli and Nomentana is definitely not one of these places where migrants would go. Okay, now from the underground Libya here, in Quartiere Africano, let's take the Metro B. This is the path of Metro B. Let's go to one of the most significant places of our tour, Termini Station here. In Oltre Babilonia, one of the characters of the novel by Scego says, all roads lead to Rome, but for all the Somalis, all roads led to Termini Station, similarly to the prayers towards Mecca. For many immigrant communities, Termini Station in Piazza di Cinquecento is not just a big square with a big station, it is a gathering place, a place where it is not difficult to meet people from your own country. Many characters of Scego's novels meet in Piazza di Cinquecento or in the surroundings. For example, it is exactly there that Adua meets her Titanic. Do you remember the story of Adua and Titanic that I previously recalled? Piazza di Cinquecento, bound with my story like no other. the square of the migrants, of the first arrivals, of all the departures, of my many regrets. In that disjointed square, I lost and found myself thousands of times. I had to go through Piazza di Cinquecento to reach that strange Somalia that developed at the rear of that railway neighborhood. I also met my Titanic in Piazza di Cinquecento. He used to haunt many of the areas of Rome as a drunk, Corso Italia, Piazza Vittorio, Ponte Lungo. But it is in Piazza di Cinquecento where I saw him bleating curses with gin heavily flowing in his veins. It's there, in that square that Italy dedicated to some soldiers who died in East Africa, that I created my fake love for myself. So why is Adwa saying that the square is dedicated to Italian soldiers who died in the Horn of Africa? Because the 500 of the Piazza di Cinquecento, Cinquecento meaning 500, are the 500 Italian soldiers who died in the Battle of Dogali in 1887, to whom this important and central square of Rome is dedicated. Let's investigate a little bit better this occurrence. In Dogali, which is now, it is now in Eritrea, but at the time it was part of the Ethiopian Empire, the Ethiopians defeated the Italian army and 500 soldiers died there. And actually, Scego recalls in Roma Negata that the Italian soldiers who died were actually 430 and not 500. So Italians were the invader, and the Ethiopians were trying to save their territory. And in the name of that invasion, we have the square of Stazione Termini in Piazza di Cinquecento, and we also have an obelisk, the Dogali Obelisk, situated just on the corner between Piazza di Cinquecento and Viale Einaudi, going towards Piazza della Repubblica, just in front of Terme di Diocleziano and Santa Maria degli Angeli e dei Santi. As Scego recalls, this is an Egyptian obelisk who was brought to Rome by the Emperor Domitian. It was found in 1883 in the Church of Santa Maria sopra Minerva, and it was then moved first in front of Termini Station in 1887, and then in 1925 in the current position. A basement has been added to the obelisk in which the names of the so-called heroes of Dogali are carved. The whole story about Piazza di Cinquecento and the Dogali obelisk is even stranger if we consider that those places and all the surroundings, as I said, are central for the life of immigrant communities in Rome, meaning this, that they meet under the burden of a memory of violence against them, which of course is very often an unaware burden, especially for younger generations. One of the most noteworthy scenes of the documentary Aulò, the one of Ribka Sibhatu that I previously mentioned, is when Ribka Sibhatu proposes to rename the square, who should no longer honor the memory of invaders, but possibly of people who were against that invasion, such as Andrea Costa and Ulisse Barbieri. Andrea Costa was an Italian politician, and Ulisse Barbieri was a writer, and in the 19th century they both fought against colonialism, reminding the Italians that the idea of colonialism itself is against the values at the center and at the core of Italian Risorgimento and Italian unification. The same proposal, and I mean to rename the square, comes from a rap song titled Piazza di Cinquecento by a singer who is not very famous. His name is Boyke Esteban. But the song is quite interesting, and the documentary Aulò shows an extract from it. So let's watch this passage of the film where we will see the rap song, but before the song you will also listen to a poem taken from Ulisse Barbieri's collection of poems Rebellion, published in 1887.
L'Italia è trascinata in una politica che l'onorevole Presidente vuole che la si dica di avventure. Per me è di crimini. La conquista non è che un'aggressione, se ammettete il diritto della forza. Io parteggio per gli abissini, per chiunque combatte in difesa della propria indipendenza. Mi ribello perché anche il pensiero ha le sue battaglie. Nella lotta si sa, si uccide per non essere uccisi. La brutalità impera, la legge è suprema. Ma la bandiera, la patria, lasciatela stare. No, non è patriottismo, per Dio. Non parliamo di glorie, non andiamo superbi di uccisioni, che se avvenute furono un delitto. Chiniamo la fronte e che i fatti insegnino. Fatalmente nulla insegneranno. Essi avranno dei morti in più, noi dei morti in più, ed il mare per tornare indietro.
Ma non capite, o branco di cretini, che i patrioti sono gli abissini. Ma non capite, o branco di cretine, che i patrioti sono gli abissini. Ma non capite, o branco di cretini, che i patrioti sono gli abissini. Piazzate 500, propongo un cambiamento, Coste e Barbieri per un nuovo sentimento della nazione con le persone nuove, facce nere ma italiane nel nuovo millennio. Piazzate 500, è giunto quel momento, dare un forte senso al rinnovamento.
Okay. Now, from Stazione Termini and all the story of Piazza di Cinquecento, let's do a nice walk facing southeast. We pass near Piazza Vittorio here and by Esquilino, one of the Roman neighborhoods with more immigrant inhabitants. And in more or less 40 minutes we are in Pigneto here. One of the best places to enjoy Roman nightlife. But Pigneto is many things. It is a gentrifying neighborhood where drug dealers and part of the wealthy Roman youth, pretending not to be so wealthy, spends the night side by side. It is a multicultural area. It is the set of different movies by Pasolini or Rossellini's Roma Città Aperta, among others. But if we move a little bit eastern than Pigneto, where the area becomes to be called Torpignattara, we find Via dell'Acqua Bulicante here, and we find here the Cinema Impero. In Roma Negata, Scego recalls the history of the cinema, born in 1938 and named Impero to celebrate the Italian colonial empire and built along the same lines as the Cinema Impero in Asmara, built 1 year before. So they are twin cinemas. Interestingly, the Roman cinema has been in 1944 a headquarters for partisans who could easily locate Nazi fascists from the roof of the building. The cinema then closed in 1970, unfortunately neglected by the city, and so it rapidly turned into a degraded place. In the past 6 years, a local group of citizens and activists started a petition for the rehabilitation of the cinema, and I think it is currently under renovation. It is just a very virtuous coincidence that almost in front of the cinema in Rome there is the primary school Pisacane, which is a school renowned for its projects and activities that promote multiculturalism. It is the most multi-ethnic school of the city, with only 40 students out of 176 coming from an Italian cultural context. This number may be not updated, but it's still like this. Okay, now from Cinema Impero, we are here. Let's take the bus number 81, direction Risorgimento, so on the other side, so this is the route of the bus. We will get off at Circo Massimo, but before arriving there, we will pass by a street, which is here. This street is just aside San Giovanni Laterano, with a funny name, Via dell'Ambaradam. As the narrative voice of the documentary Aulò says, Ambaradam is a mountain in northern Ethiopia. In 1936, Italians conquered the mountain and Addis Ababa using poison gas, or mustard gas, causing the death of more than 6,000 people. The street commemorates that massacre, of which Italians do not have memory of. What is even stranger is that for Italians, for us, Ambaradam is a colloquial expression. When we say there was an Ambaradam, it means that there was a confused situation, that there was a chaos. But in reality, in history, it was a carnage. Okay, now, this is Via dell'Ambaradam, and from here we get off at Circo Massimo, and on one side of it there is Piazza di Porta Capena, is here. There the Ministry of Colonies was located, in the building where now there is the FAO here. But what is even more interesting is the presence of 2 columns in the middle of the square. We've possibly passed by this place many times, even without even realizing that these columns represent the Twin Towers of New York. So what they do have to do in Rome and with Italian colonialism. They are there to clumsily cover a hole. Igiaba Scego, both in La mia casa dove sono and in Roma Negata, reminds the story of that place. Until very recently, until 2003, in that spot of Piazza Capena, there was the Axum Stele, taken by Italians from Ethiopia in 1937, so under fascism, and brought to Rome. The story of the restitution of the stele to Ethiopia is long, and here I will only remember, through Scego's words, that in 1997 the Corriere della Sera announced that the stele would have been given back to Ethiopia without claiming any thanks, I quote. It was effectively returned in 2005, but as it is also said in the documentary Aulò, not as a spoils of war, but as a gift to value the Ethiopian tradition and culture. Now, instead of the Axum Stele, we have two columns who remind us of another terrible page of history, the 9/11/2001, and I think we all agree with the words carved in the memorial at the base of the columns. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it, the city of Rome against every form of terrorism. But isn't it hypocrite to commemorate a tragedy happened far away, of whom somebody else is guilty, someone we do not know, in a place where until recently there was the sign of our own historical guilt? A monument to remember the victim of the 9/11. Romans ignore the meaning of these two columns. Couldn't we do anything better? Let's continue on our journey and let's walk from Circo Massimo in the heart of the center of Rome. In 30 minutes from Piazza di Porta Capena, we are in a beautiful and relatively small square, Piazza della Minerva, next to the Pantheon. Adua, the character of Scego that I previously recalled, loves to talk with Bernini's elephant, the statue that supports the obelisk, yet another obelisk in this story, in front of the church Santa Maria sopra Minerva. I like Rome in the summer, especially its warm light in the evening, at sunset, when even the seagulls are nicer and you feel like hugging them. They are the bosses of the squares, but here there is you, my little elephant, and they don't dare. Go away, stay clear of Piazza Santa Maria sopra Minerva. I feel protected next to you. Here, I'm in Magalo, I'm at home. My father as well had big ears, but he had never been able to listen, neither I had ever managed to talk with him. With you it's different. That's why I thank Bernini for having crafted you. A little marble elephant sustaining the world's smallest obelisk, a toothpick. Don't be offended if I tell you this. You know, I need you. I need to be heard, otherwise words melt and get lost. Look at the nigger, she talks to herself, people say, and they point at us. But we do not care about them. We marvelously understand each other. After all, we come from the Indian Ocean, our ocean of magic and perfumes, an ocean of separation and unification. You are a wanderer, like me. I decided to insert this quotation, not because Bernini's elephant in itself has something to do with colonialism, but because it shows how everyday corners of Rome, the places that we intimately feel like ours because they belong to our historical and cultural heritage, may be the objects of other tales narrated from a different perspective. Apart from Piazza Maria della Minerva, Scego also refers many times, for example, to Stadio Olimpico, where her characters and Scego herself go there, like everyone else, just to support Rome Football Club. Okay, from Piazza Santa Maria della Minerva, before coming back to the BSR, let's do a little diversion and let's go towards the river. We'll get to Ponte Principe Amedeo Savoia Aosta, and we do not need to cross it to see the memorial, because there is one of each of the four corners of the bridge. The memorial reminding us that the bridge is named after a prince of the House of Savoy, viceroy of Ethiopia, and called the Hero of Ambalaji, another mountain in Ethiopia, where the Italian army, fronted by Prince Amedeo Savoia, resisted, but only for a while, the British army. And by the way, there is also a square named Ambalaji in the African neighborhood. Okay, after the bridge, we go to Via di Ripetta, Riva, Via di Ripetta, Parco, Villa Borghese, and then we are back at the BSR, hopefully in time for dinner. And this was the path of our trip. So I'm going towards the end of my talk. There are other books and other writers apart from the ones I mentioned today, and there are other places apart from Rome. Our quest for colonial traces in Italy can continue and be extended to the surroundings of Rome and to the whole Lazio. To Affile, for example, a town which is part of the metropolitan city of Rome, where only 5 years ago, in 2012, a memorial park and a mausoleum funded with the taxes of Italian citizens was unveiled in honor of General Rodolfo Graziani, a war criminal called the Butcher, for his cruel repressions in Ethiopia. In 2013, Regione Lazio woke up, realized the absurdity of the project, and blocked the completion of the park in Affile, but only because of an article in the New York Times who was very critical towards the monument. Our journey may perhaps lead us even further in Bologna or in Milan, guided by the words of other Italian post-colonial writers. What I try to tell you today is a story that talks about a center and its peripheries, a story of inclusion, citizenship, respect, and enhancement of the differences. The books telling this story displays the subjectivity of the white European man as the center of all political discourses. They disturb our own narration of our own nation. They dismantle the figure of the national hero, proposing instead intersectional heroines who speak in the name of a collectivity, challenge our amnesia, and oblige us to face our historical and cultural responsibilities. So whose is Rome and what is Rome? In the final scene of the documentary Aulò, Roma Postcoloniale, the narrator says, Rome isn't in your genes, Rome belongs to the people who live there. So Rome is much more than the genes of those who have lived here for 7 generations, as some Romans say. It is a complex city, a transnational space where the heritage of the colonialism has created new identities and nomadic subjectivities according to the meaning given to the term by the scholar Rosi Braidotti, the author of the well-known book on philosophy and feminist theory, Nomadic Subjects. Nomadic subjects are subjects without fixed identity because fixed identity is the consequence of an illusionary ideology. Nomadic subjects are post-identitarian subjects who do not coincide, for example, with their being wives, mothers, or daughters. Nomadic subjectivity is, of course, a theoretical and political project, but it is not a utopia. It is rather a route, and Italian post-colonial literature is training us to follow it, and so to trespass the borders of being Roman, African, British, or Italian. Thank you.